Okay, well, welcome to this video walkthrough of the first assignment for our Design for Learning in Virtual Worlds class, the first Unity assignment. I'm going to be covering the building of your island and including in it all of the pieces that you'll need to include when you submit your first assignment. I won't, however, be following the exact order in which things are done in Chapter 3, but I'll be covering the key pieces from Chapter 3 in our Unity book. For your own work, I encourage you just to walk right through that third chapter. It will cover all of this stuff in greater detail than I will here. So go ahead and open up Unity and create a new project. For this video lesson, I'm using an older version of Unity. There may be a few things that work slightly differently if you're using the absolute newest version that you've just downloaded, and I'll try to point those out as I go along. Make sure to give your project a name, and when you give your project a name, include your own name as part of the project. On the Blackboard site, I have some specific guidelines for how to name your assignment when you go to submit it so that I'll know that it belongs to you. For now, I'm just going to name it with my own name, and I'll call it Assignment 1 with my name. I'm going to import a few packages into this. The list of packages you may see on your version of Unity might vary a little bit from what you're looking at here, but it will have all the ones that you'll need to use, including the character controller package, the scripts package, skyboxes package, terrain assets, and basic water. There are lots of other ones I've got on mine, but these are the key ones you need. Again, the water, the terrain assets, skyboxes, scripts, and character controller. Once you've selected the packages to bring into your new project, click on the Create Project button, and then Unity will go to work decompressing all of those packages, importing them into the project, and compiling scripts that are included in those packages. Unity occasionally will give you error messages, or more likely warning messages, as it does this decompression and compiling initially. Most of the time you don't have to worry about any messages that you see. Things should work okay unless you get an error. So here I've got just a warning, but that's okay, it will still work. Alright, I've set up my screen layout here specific to doing this video presentation. The layout inside your version of Unity may look different than this, but I've got all the main pieces here: the scene view, game view, project, hierarchy, and inspector. For assignment 1, you're going to be creating a tropical island complete with water, grass, trees, a volcano, lights, and some other elements. You're going to be able to walk around that island. I'm going to start us off in this lesson by creating the terrain that will be our island. Depending on which version of Unity you're using, the terrain will either appear as its own item on the menu or underneath the Game Object item under Create Other. In this case, I can just use the terrain item, choose to create the terrain, and there it is. You'll see it now appears in the project window, showing that we have a terrain, and in the hierarchy we can see that it now is included in the current scene, along with one other item, which is the main camera. By default, Unity creates a hunk of terrain that's bigger than what we want to use, so I'm going to modify its size. The way you modify the size in this version of Unity is by choosing terrain and then set resolution. That will open up a window where I can set the width and length of my terrain. I'm going to set them each to 500. That's 500 meters. And I'll leave all of the other attributes as they are here. In your version of Unity, if the terrain is created using Game Object, then the way that you change the dimensions of the terrain are a little bit different. You're going to come over into the inspector instead and click on one of these little cog pieces, and you'll have to play around and see which one it is that you're going to need, because it varies from version to version. But in this case, we're all set. We've got our terrain. The terrain doesn't look like much. Right now I can change my view of it and zoom in and out. If you wonder how I'm doing this, I'm using a combination of my mouse to move around, and on my Mac that I'm using, I hold down the Option key to convert this into an eyeball, which lets me spin around my view. I can also select that hand item and move the view. When I do this with this hand or with the eyeball, what I'm changing is the view of my terrain, not the position of the terrain in virtual space. You can also use this little gizmo in the corner here to change your view: top, right, left, bottom, and perspective, and so on. And you can use the scroll wheel on your mouse to zoom in and out. Alright. Before I begin to shape my terrain, I'm going to do a couple things to make it easier to follow what's going on. First of all, I'm going to add some light to my world. This will allow me to see some nice shadows as I'm shaping the terrain of the island, and it just looks better. So to create light, I'm going to go to my game object item, choose Create Other, and select Directional Light. Directional light is the sun in your world. Selecting that, you'll see, will now add that to my hierarchy and select it. It will show that we've got light out here in the world, and then I can make changes to the parameters associated with my sun. For now, I'm just going to leave all of these settings as is. In a future lesson, we'll get into why you might want to change these. For now, we don't need to. Alright, right now my terrain looks like it's made out of snow, and that's because we haven't added any textures to our terrain. So let's go ahead and do that next. I'm going to choose the default texture that will cover all of my terrain, and then later we'll add some other textures that will add more visual interest to our island. So I'm selecting the terrain in the hierarchy, and I'm coming over to the inspector, and I'm going to choose the paintbrush tool. With this tool and associated brushes, I can paint textures onto my island, but right now we have no textures associated with the terrain, so I need to add them. To add them, I will click on the Edit Textures button and choose Add Texture. This will open up an Add Texture window. I'll come to the Splat menu item and click on this little circle, which will open up yet another window, which will let me see all of the textures that are currently in my project. Because I imported skyboxes and terrain assets, it gave me some of nice textures that I can use. I'm going to select the Good Dirt texture and choose Add without changing any of the parameters associated with it, and that will apply this Good Dirt texture to the whole of my terrain. Okay, with that done, I'm going to go ahead and begin to shape my island. If you are following along in Chapter 3, you'll see that it gives a suggestion for the shape of your island. I'm not going to match that perfectly here. You don't need to match it perfectly. Be creative in how you design your island, just remembering that eventually it's going to need to have a volcano, so a little bit of hills here and there, and a path running across your island. So for now, I'm going to use the Set Terrain Height tool. It works similar to the Raise Terrain Height, except that I can define a maximum height for my terrain to go when I paint with one of the brushes. In this case, I'm going to set the maximum height to 30. And what this will let me do is essentially raise an island out of this flat terrain with the maximum height, in this case, of 30 meters. So let me show you how this works. I can just drag along, and you'll see that I begin to form an island, creates a kind of a level vista across the island. I'll draw it out over here. Okay, and there very quickly is an island shape. It's not beautiful, but it's good enough for now. Obviously, you can play with changing the height of that to raise up sections of your island if you wish. And that will cause some parts of it to be higher than others. And once you've done that, you can also use this raised terrain tool along with some other brushes to add some interesting shapes, little hills, and so on. In doing this, here I've added a few hills to my island, and you can see it adds some interest, but they're awfully jagged. So to smooth that out, I can use this tool, which is the Smooth Terrain Height. I'm going to choose a very big brush, set the opacity to be 100% and the brush size to be quite large. Then I'm just going to smooth over these areas that I've just created. Obviously, when you're building your own island, you're going to want to spend a lot more time coming up with the shape, making it look as naturalistic as possible, if you wish to make it look naturalistic. But for now, I'm going to just do a very quick version of it. Next thing I'm going to do is draw a volcano. I'm going to use my Paint Height tool again, select a big round brush, set the brush size to be 100, the opacity I'll reduce a little bit, and I'm going to set the height now up to, let's say, 50. Then I'll choose my view, pick a place for my volcano to exist. I'll put it right here, and I'll just start painting, moving my little mouse around just a little bit to draw that volcano. So it's not beautiful looking. In fact, it's a little bit low. So I might just, instead of using the Set Terrain Height tool, I'm going to go ahead and use the Paint tool, or the Raise Terrain tool, and start sort of clicking around to draw up a nice, a little bit more natural looking volcano here. One thing to note when you're drawing anything using this Raised Terrain tool is that if you hold down the Shift key, it will lower the terrain back down. Okay, there's my volcano, looking pretty good. It's a little skinny, so I might widen it out a little bit. There we go. Once I've got the rough shape of my volcano in place, I'm going to create the crater in the middle of the volcano. To do this, I'm going to use this Lower Terrain tool. Make sure that I'm looking at my volcano from above and center my brush right above it. Hold down the Shift key and just begin drawing a little circle in here. And what I'm doing now is creating the crater into my volcano. As you can see, I might lower the whole volcano down just a bit here around the edges. So mine is a very old volcano that's been sort of weathered away over time. In fact, I'll weather it down even a little bit more. Okay, so now we've got a nice volcano that's occupying most of our island here. Might smooth things out a little bit between it and the rest of the land. At this point, if you haven't done so already, you should save the scene you're working on. I've already saved mine, as you can see here. I've called it Island 1. To save your scene, you simply go to File and Save Scene, or Save Scene As. It's a good idea as you make changes to your island that you relatively frequently come in and do a Save Scene As and update your file name, just in case something goes amiss and you want to go back to an earlier version. So I'll call this one Island 2. Alright, right now our island doesn't look very interesting because it's all one texture. So I'm going to add some other textures now. So I select my terrain, go to the inspector, choose the paintbrush tool, come down to edit textures, and I'm going to add several more textures now. I'm going to add a cliff texture that we're going to use for our volcano. And I'm going to add a grass texture. And I'm going to add another texture that's sort of a combination of grass and rock, called Grass and Rock. before I paint these textures on my island, I want to sort of lighten the whole scene that I'm looking at here. Right now, even though I've added a directional light, so I've got some shadows, it's sort of dark still. So let me show you how you can lighten up the whole scene. And at the same time, I'm going to add a skybox so that we'll have a nice blue sky with some clouds in the background. So I'm going to go up to Edit and choose Render Settings. And I'll look over at the inspector, and I can see the ambient light of my island right now is pretty dark, so I'm going to raise that up. And you'll see as I lighten up the ambient light in the scene view, the whole island is getting brighter. So I'll put it about there. From the same Render Settings inspector, I can choose a skybox material. And I've got Sunny 1, Sunny 2, Sunny 3. I'll just choose Sunny 3, I guess, in this case. Well, let's do Sunny 2. Now when I look around my scene, you can see now my island is floating with some nice clouds and blue sky. Alright, let's come back to the terrain and we'll add these other textures now. For the main part of the island, I'm going to choose the grass texture. And just start painting it in there. It's a little strong. So I'll lower the target strength just a bit. And start painting my way around. As usual, I'm doing this super fast for the sake of this tutorial video. When you're doing your own, you're going to want to spend much more time making it look good. I'm also going to add some rock to my volcano. Make it look more volcano-like. Both in and outside. And when you're doing this, you'll want to play around with blending your textures together. I'm not doing that so much here just because I'm doing the super quick version of this. But when you're playing with it on your own, you'll be able to, by lowering the opacity, get a nice blend effect where two textures meet. Okay. I'm going to put in a little path onto my island as well. That I will change later on, but for now, that'll work all right. Let's see. Raise that brush size a bit, and we'll just make a path that runs along here. Yeah, make it even stronger. There we go. I'll just sort of meander around the island a little bit there, like so. Next, I'm going to add some trees to the island by selecting the Place Trees tool in the Terrain Inspector, clicking Edit Trees and Add Tree. I'm going to select the palm tree. Then there are a lot of settings for these trees in terms of the usual brush size, and then a really important one is the tree density. If you leave it high, you're going to have a forest, essentially, of trees. You can also vary the color of the trees. You can choose the height of the trees and how much variation there is in height, and the same with the width. So I'll place a few trees around. If you decide that you've got too many trees in a given location, if you hold down the Shift key, you can delete those trees out. But I actually kind of like the number of trees that I've got going here. Next, I'm going to add some grass to the island using the Place Plant Stones and Other Small Foliage tool, and clicking Edit Details and choose to add a grass texture. If I scroll down, you'll find some 2D textures for the grass. Here's one called Grass and one called Grass 2. I'll choose Grass. Here I can also change some settings for the minimum width, maximum width, minimum height, maximum height, and so on. I'm just going to leave all the default settings. One thing to notice with grass is that it's pretty expensive in terms of processing in order to render the grass, and in fact Unity will default to not rendering the grass unless you're very close to the grass on your island. So what that means in terms of placing the grass, you're going to need to zoom way in so that you can actually see the grass going on when you paint with it. I would recommend, depending on the machine that is going to be running your island, you may want to take a sort of subtle approach to adding grass because it's so expensive in terms of processing power. Okay, so we've got a little bit of grass there. I'll add more later, obviously. This is supposed to be an island, but so far we have no water around it. So next I'm going to add some water. I'll go into my project view, into the standard assets folder, go down to the water subfolder, choose daylight simple water, and simply drag it out into my scene. You'll see that it's much smaller than our island, so we need to change the scale. If you remember, we set the size of the island to be 500 meters by 500 meters, so I need to be something bigger than that. I'll go 800 by 800. Then I need to position that water, so I'll use my positioning tool and simply drag it around and up until it's set so the island is roughly in the middle of it. Now if I zoom down and look around, I'm starting to have something that looks like a real island. Alright, we're getting fairly close here for the pieces. What we can't do yet on our island is actually walk around, so I'm going to do that next by adding a first-person controller to my project. To do that, I can go up to the project view, to the standard assets, and you'll remember when we created the project, we imported the character controllers, and so I can just grab the first-person controller and drag it out into the scene. With that first-person controller selected in the hierarchy, I can move my mouse over the scene view and hit the F key, and it will zoom me in close to wherever it is that object is in the scene, which allows me to easily position it where I want it. This first-person controller contains its own camera called main camera. Unity is not happy if you have two cameras in the scene that are both called main camera. You can actually have tons of cameras in a scene, but only one of them can be identified as main camera. Therefore, once I've got the first-person controller in my island positioned in a nice location, I need to come back to my hierarchy view and delete the original main camera that was in there. This first-person controller contains all of the code that you will need in order to use your mouse to look around and in order to move your character through the virtual island. So with that, we should be able to now play our scene and try out walking around the island. To play your scene, you look to this little control panel in the center of your screen, click on the play button, and here we are. We're looking up at the sky. If I move my mouse around, I can now see, here's my grass. I'm standing on the middle of the path. I can use the WASD keys, sort of standard keyboard keys for moving around my island. I can use the space bar to jump. And here we are. I've now got my very first island. A few more steps to complete in order to have first assignment requirements finished. We'll do those next. Okay, well, we are nearly finished. The last thing we're going to do is add sound to our island. For assignment number 1, I don't actually require you to include background sound, but I want to show you now how to do it because you're going to need to have it for upcoming assignments, and it will also give me a chance to show you where you can download or how you can download all of the assets from the Unity book. So in order to add sound, we need to have some sound files, and we're going to get those from the Unity package, which is available with the purchase of the Unity book. To download the Unity package, you're going to go to this website, PactPub Support 8704, and from that page, you'll just give them your email address, put in a captcha code, and they'll send you the link to download the package with all of the assets for all of the assignments and chapters in the book. Once you've got that package on your own computer, then you can import it into your project by going to Assets, Import Package, Custom Package, and then navigate to where it is you've downloaded the assets package, which is called book_assets.unity package. When you do that, you'll get an import package window that's asking you which of the elements that are in that package you want to import. It's fine just to choose all and click on import. It will then decompress, import, and compile any scripts, if necessary, into your project. And this will take a minute or two to get that done. Once they're all imported in your project view, you'll see you now have a folder called Book Assets, which includes models, sounds, and some more textures as well. We're going to use all of these textures and sounds and models in upcoming Unity assignments, so it's a good idea to get them into your project now. Alright, for this tutorial, the last thing we're going to do is add sound, and what we're going to add is an environmental sound. It's going to be a background sound of essentially the nature of this island that will play no matter where I am on the island. In Unity, there are 2D sounds, which are usually used for things like background music or for environmental audio, and there are 3D sounds, which are good for positional audio. If there's a sound connected to an animal, let's say, in your virtual world, a cow mooing or something, you would use a 3D audio sound for that, so that it can be positioned in space, and so that the sound drops off as you move farther away from the object it's connected to. In this case, we're using environmental audio, so we use a 2D one. So in order to do that, we need to have an object in our environment that is going to act as the audio source. In our case, we're going to use the terrain as the source for our audio. So with the terrain selected, I'm going to go to Component, Audio, Audio Source. Now you'll see over in the inspector that our terrain is now the audio source, and we can associate an audio clip with it. Right now we don't have an audio clip yet, but we're going to add it. If we go into the Book Assets folder and then into the Sounds subfolder, you'll see we've got a whole collection of sounds. The one we're going to use for now is the Hillside audio file. And in order to use that, we can simply take it and drag it over to the inspector, and now that becomes our audio. And you'll see it's listed as being a 3D sound. We'd actually like it to be a 2D sound, so we can modify it a little bit. I'll show you how to do that. In order to convert this 3D sound into a 2D sound, we select the sound itself in the project folder, and in doing so we will see the import settings for this audio file, and you'll see that it is a 3D sound. All we have to do is deselect that checkbox, hit Apply. It will re-import that audio file as a 2D file. And there we have it. Now when we come back and check, it's no longer listed as being 3D, it's now a 2D sound file. Now we can hit play, and we should now, you won't hear it in this recording, because I'm not using the system audio, but in my own headsets I now hear a nice background environmental audio sound. Alright, so with that I've got all of the elements I need for the assignment number 1, plus audio. When you're doing your own assignment, I encourage you to spend much more time than I've done here making your island look just the way you like it. Add in some different textures, modify the terrain. You're welcome to make the island bigger if you like. Just make sure it's got that volcano, because we're going to be using it in upcoming lessons. So how do you now save and publish your project so that you can submit it for class? Well, here's how you can do it. I'm going to ask that you submit your project as a web version of the Unity player. If you go to your file on the menu and look at your build settings, it's likely by default your project has been set up as a PC and Mac standalone project. I want you to not use that when you submit your project, but instead use the web player platform. To do this, it's fairly simple. You just simply select web player and then click on switch platform. Unity will do a bit of thinking in the background just to make sure there aren't any problems in converting from a desktop version of the island to a web player, and there aren't any. Then click on Player Settings, and over in the inspector you'll see a few settings over here specific now to publishing out to the web. Right now we don't really need to do anything. We can simply leave everything as it is. Then you can click on Build and Run. Here's where you're going to need to give your file a name that's going to make it readily identifiable for me so that I know that this is your assignment. So name your file in a way that it identifies you as the author of the project. In this case, because we're publishing it out as a web player, there are going to be two files. There's going to be a file that contains the Unity project with the extension .unity3d, and there's going to be an HTML file. You need to submit both of those files with your assignment. You can either submit them individually, to submit them both, or you can submit them as a zip file, but I need to have both of those in there. Also test the published version of your project to make sure it runs well. Occasionally I get versions that don't actually run. Alright, so in my case I'll save mine as Brian Nelson Sign 1. Then Unity will build the player, and because I selected Build and Run, it will then open up a web browser and run the application. And it takes a minute or two to do this. Okay. You can see what this looks like. It's automatically opened up my Chrome browser, and I'm going to let it run. And here it is, running inside my browser, and I can move around and walk around. So it appears to be working. Now I need to find where I've saved that pair of files, and then I need to upload them, and I'll show you briefly how to do that next. On my computer, I saved my project into the folder under Brian and Brian Assignment and so on and so on. And I keep drilling down until I get to the place that has the HTML file and the Unity 3D file, which are in a folder. And then I'm going to submit this, I'm going to zip it. And then what I'll submit to the Blackboard site is this zipped file containing both of those other files. In terms of submitting it, you'll go on our course Blackboard site to the Unity Assignments folder, and you'll see that the very first item is Unity Skill-Based Assignment number 1. If you go in there, there'll be a place where you can submit your assignment by attaching that zip file containing the two other files, and you're also able to add any comments you want me and our grader to see, and then you hit the submit button. So that's it. Have fun with this assignment. It's a nice way to jump in quickly into Unity, get something built really fast, and then we'll go into more complex and interactive elements in upcoming assignments.